This series is very important because today we, as AHUF, the African Union for Housing Finance, are launching the annual yearbook that is published by CAF. And with us today to discuss the contents and the findings that have come out of this year's, that's the 2021 yearbook, is Alison Shangana. Alison is the head of research and market intelligence for CAF. Alison is an experienced national, provincial, and local governments expert that specializes in housing policy research and development. So welcome, Alison. I think you're on mute, we can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Mildred.
All right, thank you. We also have on the panel today, Mr. Daniel Mina, and Daniel is an associate director for the housing finance. He's an associate director for housing finance systems at Habitat for Humanity International. And as you are aware, Habitat for Humanity is an international non-profit Christian organization that seeks to eliminate poverty in housing and homelessness from the world and to make decent shelter a matter of conscious and action for the world. Habitat has built or renovated more than 800,000 homes, quite a staggering number. And they have provided more than 4 million people across the globe with safe and decent, affordable shelter. So welcome, Daniel. If you're able to unmute and just switch on your camera so that we can see you. Daniel, can you hear us? All right, I think Daniel is having some technical challenges there. I'm sure that's all right, thank you so much. We also have Paul Jackson, and Paul is the CEO for TAF in South Africa, and TAF Limited provides access to finance for entrepreneurs from all walks of life. TAF also provides support and guidance and risk management for entrepreneurs. And in 13 years, TAF has financed over 4 billion Rand in the inner city residential rental property. This is not to mention the hundreds of successful property engineers who are now running sustainable residential rental businesses and providing affordable and decent living spaces in the inner cities. So thank you so much, Paul Jackson, for making time to join us to discuss the CAF yearbook.
Thanks, Mildred, and I'm happy to be here, and hello, everybody.
All right, and we will be joined by Festus Adebayo. And Festus is an executive director for an international housing construction show, which is based in Nigeria, previously referred to as the Abuja International Housing Show. My names are Mildred Mutesa. I'm the chairperson of the lobbying committee of the AHUF. I also head Zambia National Building Society here in Zambia. So thank you, every one of you, for joining. Just housekeeping measures. We will have an introductory session where Alison Shangana will do a presentation regarding the key fact finds from the yearbook. We'll then go into a panel discussion where our panel members will take us through their thoughts and insights on the findings from the CAF yearbook. And we'll end up with a question and answer session. So please note whatever questions you would like to ask and post them in the group if you can, and we'll read out your questions and take questions at the end. So Alison, I'll hand over to you to take us through the key findings from this year's yearbook. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Let me see if I can share my screen here. There we go. Are you seeing the cover slide, I hope?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, super. Great, thank you so much for the opportunity. For those of you who don't know the yearbook, it is the flagship publication of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, CAF. We've been doing it, this is our 12th edition. And what the yearbook does essentially is it provides a succinct summary of the housing and housing finance markets in each country in Africa. So it is a book of 55 country profiles, and it is done annually, obviously as a yearbook. So it really focuses on the developments in the last year in each country, and it provides a succinct summary of those developments and resources and key data points as well. So we're very pleased with this year's yearbook. We have an entire network of experts who put together the different country profiles. So we appoint in-country experts where possible, and they do the research and the writing of the profiles. And there were nearly 50 different authors contributing this year from all across the continent. So it's a massive collaborative effort, which we're very proud of. So what we want to do today is share the main findings. As I said, there are 55 profiles. We doubt that you will read all of them, although they are available on the CAF website. But at the outset of the yearbook, there is an overview that's put together by Kezia Russ, the director of CAF, that summarizes some of the main developments in the past year in the housing and housing finance markets and affordable housing market in Africa. So what I want to do today is unpack some of those main findings, and then we can talk about whether they're an accurate representation of what's happening in the market and what their implications are and impact. So the first part here is just recognizing that Africa's affordable housing markets are now, we're nearly through 2 years of COVID, of a global pandemic. And that really is the context for the yearbook this year. Last year, we were dealing with lockdowns and we managed to get the yearbook out. But this year, we were seeing very much the economic impact starting to hit these countries and hit the housing markets. So you can see on this slide, on the left-hand side is the GDP per capita for each country. And then on the right, one in the orangish is the urbanization rates. So what we're seeing across the continent is historically low growth, which of course was compounded by COVID. So we collect the GDP growth rates each year for the yearbook. And what we were seeing this year was disturbing. So there were countries with growth rates that had contracted by 8%, 9%, 14%. Some managed to still have 1 or 2% growth, but on the whole, we were seeing GDP growth rates that were contractions. And the implications, of course, of that on the ground are staggering. Africa, of course, is also dealing with urbanization. So exceptionally high urbanization rates, as you can see in the second map, particularly across Central Africa and West Africa as well. On the green map of Africa, what you're seeing is the urban population, the percent of the urban population living in slums. This, of course, is one of the key indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see that the percent, the darker the color, the higher the percent of the urban population living in slums. And again, you can see that the percentages are quite high across the Central Africa and West Africa as well. And then what we wanted to do was to start to look at and try to understand the impact of COVID. So on the right-hand side, what you'll see is the indicator is the number of cumulative deaths from COVID since the beginning of the pandemic per 100,000 people in the population. And what we wanted to do, we looked at this indicator as well as looking at the percent of vaccination rate as of the 1st of October. We wanted to get a sense of the impact. And of course, you can see that this also is contingent on the degree of reporting and recording in the public health sector of the cases and the deaths as well. So that's the picture that we have overall. One of the key things that we do in the yearbook each year is to ask the authors and the researchers to go out and speak to developers, affordable housing developers, knock on their doors and find out from 3 or 4 developers, what is the cheapest newly built house by a private developer in the last year? So where can we find the least expensive house unit that's on the market in the private sector in the last year. And what we see here is that what we found, the graph shows in the orange, the price of the cheapest newly built house by a formal developer in each country. And then what we saw was that the cheapest newly built house this year was the same one that we identified last year, okay, which is the unit built by the Millard Fuller Foundation, which is outside of Abuja, and it's offered for sale by the Family Homes Fund. It's offered for 3.4 million naira, or US dollars 8,275. So it's a low cost. However, there are only 600 units in that development. So one of the issues that we're seeing is that even though houses are being sold at lower rates in the affordable housing market, we're not seeing them coming at scale. So in most countries, what we were seeing, and you can see from the graph, that the price of the cheapest newly built house was somewhere between 10,000 and 40,000. So we were getting above 10,000, but we were also seeing quite a few units that were below 10,000. It's important to note that these are indicative statistics. So it is not the indicator is not the cost of the cheapest newly built house that could be built, that is possible. Instead, it's what's actually on the market. And this indicator, of course, doesn't speak to the number of units that are going onto the market at this price. So it could be a very small amount in a limited project. That having been said, it's useful to unpack some of what those units are and where they're coming from and what the circumstances are of their developments. So these are 4 of the units in Nigeria, Kenya, Mozambique, and Angola. You can see that 2 of these, in addition to the Millard Fuller Foundation house in Nigeria, the house delivered by Casa Real in Mozambique, both of those were supported with capital from Real. And I see that Ben is here. Welcome to Ben from Real. Real is an impact investor that targets the delivery of affordable housing, both in Africa and Asia. So you can see the support and the impact of their interventions in the cheapest newly built house in both Mozambique and Nigeria. The Kenyan and Angolan examples are by private developers. So Savo Real Estate and Umojust in South Africa developed the units in those 2 countries. What we're seeing across the board is that, of course, the units are quite small in their specs. So they're somewhere between 20 and 34 square meters. Not large, but a number of them are freestanding. You can see that the Angolan units are 4-story, 3-story. So they're going up as opposed to freestanding units in the development. And I think the other thing that's important to note is that we're seeing that it's possible that the land cost, which is significant in most of these situations, may have been partly subsidized by government. So it's unclear when we collect this data on the cheapest newly built house, the extent to which government subsidies contributed to the low cost that was possible by the private developer. So if we think then about the cheapest newly built house, and we take the cost of that house for each individual country, it's going to vary between countries. We then do a calculation to try to figure out what % of the urban population could afford that house if they were able to access a mortgage at the prevailing terms and conditions that are present in that country. Okay. So what you see here is a map of the percentage of the urban population who can afford the cheapest newly built house by a private developer in that country. Okay, and the green, of course, is a higher %, and the red shows a much lower % and constrained access. Now, I think the interesting point is this is the picture for 2021. Compare that to 2020. And there you can start to see the economic impact, I think, of COVID. And the negative economic growth rates that we're seeing across the continent. So a lot more red this year, a lot more constrained access to these units by a larger portion of the urban population. This picture says on the right-hand side, sorry, on the left-hand side is again the same map that we just saw. It's the % of the urban population who can afford that cheapest newly built house. But let's pretend instead that we were able to deliver that Millard Fuller Foundation unit that costs $8,275. Let's pretend that that could be delivered in every country across the continent. If that was possible, then would we be able to see green across the entirety of Africa? And the answer is no. You can see here on the right-hand side that even if we were able to roll out that unit in every country across the continent, there would still be constrained access in a number of countries, such as Libya, Zambia, Zimbabwe. And that suggests then that the challenge with affordability is not just the price of the house. It is more complex than that and wider. So what are those key challenges? This is a little bit of a summary that comes out of all 55 profiles. So we get a detailed view of each country, and from that we can start to pull up at a high level and start to see the commonalities. One of the key challenges, of course, being around land and infrastructure capacity. So in many countries, land assembly, the titling, the management systems are not available uniformly across the country and are not efficient in the ways they need to be to support transactions in the market. We also see that opportunities for densification can be limited if the supply chains are not operating well in the country. And of course, this was heavily hit by the pandemic this year. Also, in many cases, the lack of underlying infrastructure. So if the municipality can't provide the core bulk services in a particular area, it often means what we see is that private developers need to step in and provide that bulk in their developments. And of course, if that happens, then the price of the units goes up in order to incorporate that cost. Construction and management capacity is another key challenge. Few developers have the capacity to build more than 500 units at a time, consistently over a number of years. So we'll see these bursts of large projects, but you're not seeing sustained delivery at scale by private developers. The capacity is not there. Houses that are formally built are largely out of reach of the majority of households. So this was the picture we were seeing in the previous map. Okay, what's delivered in the private market, in the formal market, is just out of range. It's not a possibility. It's not realistic for the majority of households in each of the countries. Instead, the majority of housing is being delivered, and we're seeing this across countries. The majority of housing being delivered is delivered by households themselves, building incrementally, adding on to their units, adding on to their houses, or buying land and then slowly building a small house and adding on over time, over a number of years. It's also being built by small scale builders. So somebody who's developing 1 or 2 units at a time and keeps expanding. Okay. So this is an engine of supply that is often not recognized by policy, by regulation, and by the finance market in terms of supporting this kind of development. So we're also seeing small scale landlordism. So in the rental markets across a number of African countries, you're seeing especially women letting out rooms in the house or letting out a room in the back. And that's serving as an important income source and means of livelihood. So the house then becomes not just a means of shelter, but also economic value as well. Another key challenge in the affordable housing markets is the financial sector capacity. So we're seeing thin mortgage markets, with some exceptions, thin mortgage markets with a limited capacity to grow. And again, that has been hit hard by COVID. There were, of course, decreased interest rates in a number of cases in a number of countries, but on the whole, the mortgage markets have taken a hit and remain very thin. We recently did some research in Ghana and Senegal, looking specifically at access by women to housing finance. And when we did a mobile survey of 200 women in Ghana, for instance, only one of them had a mortgage out of 200. So the mortgage markets are just very, very thin. What we're seeing as well is narrow focus on sort of cookie cutter, standardized finance and credit products. So the banking sector is rolling out the usual products without thinking carefully about the diversity and segmentation of demand. So what are the different niche markets and how could the financial product be tailored to meet the needs of those particular segments of the market. Lastly, we're seeing virtually no attention to the supply side financing. So construction finance, particularly for smaller developers, is very scarce. Another issue then is the municipal capacity, so local government capacity. Development controls are largely structured, planning processes are largely structured around gearing towards large-scale developers. So the system works for them, but it doesn't work for the small-scale developer. So for instance, in South Africa, an example would be parking requirements, okay? Those may be relevant in the inner city or in larger housing projects, but in small scale developments of 2 or 3 units in a township area, they serve to block development instead of facilitating it. We're also seeing that local government is spending less time thinking about how they can leverage their powers and functions, their authorities and strengths to create a more enabling environment for the affordable housing sector. And then the last piece around key challenges would be the data gap. So the very limited data that is available on the affordable housing sector. And what that means then is that investors can't quite scope the opportunities, and then they have to quantify the risks when they're dealing with an unknown. So I won't go through all of these, but what we're seeing in all of the country profiles is innovation along the value chain. So here's the value chain and the steps in the affordable housing market. And we're seeing examples in all the different countries of innovation at each step. So there are key challenges, but we're also seeing some exciting opportunities. For instance, mortgage lending for incremental owner-builder construction in Zambia, related to both the house construction and also supporting maintenance and ongoing improvements. For instance, we're seeing savings and credit cooperatives working with housing construction cooperatives in Kenya. Or in South Africa and Zambia, there's blended finance arrangements to support end user finance, again, targeted at the little niche markets. And then in terms of the social and economic infrastructure, that is the last piece in the value chain, we're seeing some exciting innovations around supporting home-based enterprises and backyard rental. Well, so you'll see throughout the country profiles, examples of innovation, case studies of new projects and new ideas and their rollout and implementation on the ground. I mentioned that one of the key challenges, of course, is the data gaps. And CAF has really taken this on in the last few years and is championing and developing an initiative called the Open Access Initiative that's part of the larger data agenda for Africa. We have a number of partners with us on this, including FSD Africa, FSD Africa Investments, Real, FSD Kenya, IHS. The AUHF is also working with CAF. And essentially the idea here is that we want to gain access to more information at a project level or at the portfolio of project level. So information from private developers. Now the private developers don't want to share that information. So the basic idea behind the Open Access Initiative is that we say as investors, we get the investors on board and the investors say, look, we'll give you the funds, but as a condition of receiving these funds, we'd like you to make that data available to us. We will curate it and put it in an anonymous fashion, right? So that we can then analyze it and make that analysis and value add available to the larger market. Okay? So it won't have the names, it won't have the details, but we will make the value add and the benefit and the learnings from that data available to the larger market. And what that would mean is the developers can then spend time on the projects and not on collecting the research and trying to access the data, because the data becomes a public good. Just as the last slide, I think the main theme then, and you've heard it already in what I'm speaking about, the main theme coming out of the 2021 yearbook is about this opportunity for massive small. And massive small being the concept of supporting small scale housing providers, whether it's households or small scale developers. And if we can create an enabling environment and create tools and levers to support those small scale developers, then we can have a massive supply because so many of these small scale developers are being supported and are putting units out in the market. It may be 2 or 3 units at a time instead of 500 units. But if there's enough of them that are being supported, we're going to see the impact on supply. So I think the ideas coming out are in terms of, it would be helpful to shift our target towards building, say, a $11,500 US dollar house. So trying to bring down the unit cost for very low income households. I think also in order to support massive small, we need to start changing our vision of supply and who the suppliers are. So instead of thinking about large scale building materials suppliers, think about the small scale suppliers, the suppliers by the side of the road, the hardware store, and what role they play in supporting massive small. Also developing finance products and services that take into account the reality of household level or small scale developers. So recognizing that loans need to be small in their quantum, that many times incomes are informal. So you have a woman owning a spaza shop that she runs out of the frontage of the house, and she wants to take that income and use it to build a room at the back that she can then rent out. Okay. Now that's an informal income, so we need to tailor products that are going to recognize that and account for it in the underwriting. And finally, related again to the data, all of this needs to be underpinned by project level data to better understand really the scope and the potential of this market. So what we need to see then is creativity along this trajectory of thinking about massive small. I will leave it there, Chair, and maybe we can hear what the panelists think about some of these developments coming out of the yearbook. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison, for that very insightful presentation. I must say, if you haven't had a chance to have a look at the yearbook, please do you can get a copy, download it. Please go to the website for HUF or for CAF so that you can see the detailed developments that are happening in your country. Thank you so much, Alison. So I'll turn to the panel. Very interesting presentation from Alison, and so much facts coming out in terms of the landscape and the challenges that the housing market is facing. And also very interesting to hear the opportunities that exist. The massive small concept. I know Paul Jackson and his team have been working at this concept for quite a while. Paul, would you perhaps give us your perspective in terms of the massive small concept that Alison just alluded to and how that has worked in the South African concept, and perhaps it is something that the rest of Africa should be looking to perhaps take advantage of in resolving the issue of affordable housing?
Thank you, Mildred. Massive small is certainly a concept that my organization has been targeting for many years. And I think the important part about massive small is it's a means of supply, but it's a means of a few other things. One of the consequences of rapid urbanization, which South Africa and the rest of the continent are going through. And by the way, the yearbook continues to improve every year and become more and more insightful. And congratulations to Alison and her team for really what is easily the best yearbook produced to date. Is that one of the consequences of rapid urbanization is urban sprawl. One of the consequences of urban sprawl is that you are more likely to entrench poverty if you are living far away from city centers and far away from hubs of economic activity. So I think massive small has a particular context in respect of you're more likely to achieve the opposite of urban sprawl, that is urban densification, through many smaller interventions. In South Africa, at least we say, we as in Tough says, that massive small is 10,000 20-unit projects on average per annum. Then we're starting to get to massive small. Massive small projects are more likely to be in city and inner city. They're more likely to be driven by local entrepreneurs. They cover a range of spectrums from people building backyard rental to formal housing supply, either for sale or for rent. And there are a number of effects that this can bring about. One is local economic development, because if you're interested in inclusive economic growth, it is essentially a microeconomic concept. And as a microeconomic concept, you're going to create the twin effects of entrepreneurial development, whether it be in the construction or in the sale of these very small projects, and can be a single unit or 5 units, can be 60 units, that kind of thing. You're more likely to create job opportunities in that area. And then, of course, the value chain is a economic linkages issue, but then you have multipliers. So you have many other small businesses arising out of this intervention, whether from sort of hairdressers, panel beaters, whatever, the whole spectrum of service industries then arise. I think the second thing about massive small is its fiscal effects. I think we often don't worry enough about what is the effect on the public purse. Massive small uses existing infrastructures, whether it be physical, social, or administrative, and it's often the administrative one that is the most expensive. So it's very important that massive small, by using existing infrastructures, saves a lot in terms of infrastructure delivery, saves a lot in terms of creating new administrative infrastructures, but also increases value, so that a municipal tax base and a municipal service cost is then reduced. So massive small is a very, very important concept, probably one of the most important concepts that we currently have of our time. What are the constraints to massive small? In the South African context, it's 3 things mainly. It's really about rights and an enabling environment for people to do these infill type projects, these densification projects. The second is that South African, and particularly our politicians and our senior civil servants, really love big projects. We have a very big project mindset. And the problem with big projects is they normally take place far away from the city. And then the last is the lack of belief in the ordinary person. We have an enormous number of entrepreneurs who live in our cities who have very, very strong local knowledge, and can make most effective use of local opportunities. And it's really about creating, getting through those constraints, overlaying it with a financial ability or financing ability, and that's where Tough continues to learn, both in city and in our sort of traditional townships. So massive small is a very exciting concept, and I'm really, really pleased it's been highlighted in this yearbook, and I really do hope it starts to get traction, both in South Africa and across the continent.
Well, thank you so much. So I guess the key takeaway from you, Tough, from you, Paul, and with your experience in what you're doing in South Africa, is doing small projects at a massive scale, as opposed to looking for bigger projects, which are normally outside greenfield and far away from economic activity, rendering most of those projects non-viable. So thank you so much. Just a reminder, so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask concerning the yearbook or the discussion with the panel members, please do post your question in the chat group. Our secretariat has also posted a link to the full yearbook. So please do go ahead and just access the yearbook from the link that has been provided. So turning to you, Mina. Mina, you work for Habitat for Humana, and you've got not just an African view, but a continental view really, and a view of the housing challenge across the globe. One of the staggering statistics coming out of this year's yearbook is that affordability is a serious challenge, and even taking the cheapest built house in 2021 coming out of Abuja in Nigeria, costing around $8,200. For a lot of the African countries, that unit still remains highly unaffordable. Are you able to give us a perspective in terms of how this affordability challenge that has been highlighted in this year's yearbook, how from a Habitat Humana point of view, how this plays out on the global perspective? Is it agreeing with what's happening on the rest of the globe? And is there something that can be done to address this particular challenge if we're going to deliver affordable housing initiatives?
Thanks, Mildred. I'm in a place where I'm struggling with network, so I won't put my video, but I hope you can hear me. So first of all, let me congratulate the team for putting this yearbook. I've been following it up for several years, and I echo Paul's comment that quite an improvement we have seen, and really a helpful book to really try to show the housing situation in different African markets, but also some of the challenges. So I'll talk more about the financing piece of housing. And it's good, we are seeing that people are realizing that from an African context, incremental housing is very critical, but incremental housing comes with a lot of challenges. And as Habitat, we are trying to address these housing finance issues through a market system. I've seen through the yearbook now the market systems approach that is coming up clearly. That is very good because not to say that single solutions are not important, but it is important that we look at market systems while we're addressing this affordable housing. At the demand side, it's good that we are realizing that majority of who we are targeting are low income, informal, most of them are informal, and hence how do we build the solutions that are really addressing their needs. I like the concept, and picking up from Paul's point of massive small. It's critical as well. We look at the supply chain and say, then how do we support this massive small to ensure that we see value out of these small systems that are coming up. The biggest challenge with when we start getting into a massive small situation is basically informality. So all these builders, small builders that you see in the market, small suppliers that are there in the market, you find most of them are informal, and hence then accessing finance for them becomes a problem. If you talk about the supply side in terms of the financial service providers, they tell you that they don't understand where these people are, they don't understand what they do, and hence they become a risk towards them getting finance from a financial providers. And hence then for us, as we're looking at market systems to address this, we see and say, how do we now formalize these input providers, these supply chains, and connect them to formal financial services for them to start getting a financial capability so they can enable the demand side to get this housing at a very affordable pricing. So I echo most of these challenges that have been mentioned. They cut across African context, but then how to resolve, we believe the market systems approach will really help. We need to recognize that the demand side, majority of them are informal, the low income, and hence what we provide to them really needs to be appropriate and really addressing their needs depending on the income levels. So I'll pause there, Mildred, and in case any questions, we'll continue engaging. Thank you.
much, Amina. Much appreciated. I think another thing that came out is the 5 points that Alison raised around the challenges that countries are facing delivering affordable housing. From your perspective, is this consistent with what you're seeing in the South African market?
Thanks, Mildred. I think that the 5 points that Alison raised are applicable in the South African market, but it's particularly the data agenda that I believe is a critical one in the South African context. You know, there's that old saying is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And the way to find out where you're going is not only a public policy choice, but an informed public policy choice. And without data and research and the kind of stuff that CAF does and some of the universities do, then you are in a situation where your public policy choices aren't necessarily informed, aren't necessarily targeted at real demand, aren't really necessarily looking at the sort of plethora of urban economic and social issues that should inform an appropriate, integrated and coherent housing policy. South African, the public sector investment in urbanization and particularly housing research is nothing short of woeful in South Africa. We certainly very, very critical that the Department of Human Settlements, the various provincial departments, et cetera, have very small, if zero, allocation to research and to data. So for us, and certainly where I sit, that data gap is our biggest one. And then the second issue really then would be, how do we maximize the infrastructures that we have? Just to conclude, and back to Daniel's point of the informality, we've recently launched a project called the Umastandi project, which targets much more micro, smaller scale developers in our traditional townships, areas like the Sowetos and Khayelitsha's and others that you may or may not have heard of. And we have been absolutely amazed at the quality of the housing that's been built, whether it be on a backyard basis or on a sort of formal 2-story walk-up type basis. So informality can, if the appropriate finance system's in place, microfinance on the one side and commercial property finance on the other, you will go a long way of formalizing that informality, and particularly in terms of the finished product. So Mildred, I make a very strong comment on the importance of research and the data agenda, that this is a public good and then should be financed by the public purse. And the absence of it in South Africa, as I've indicated, is a real concern to us in the housing sector locally.
Thank you very much, Paul. Again, I think the main item coming out in terms of South Africa from Paul's perspective is the issue to do with data availability. You will agree that in the absence of data availability, it makes investment into the housing sector, whether from the finance side or perhaps from the supply side, in terms of development, it makes it very difficult. What we have seen in Zambia is a lot of projects coming up targeting the wrong market. And what then happens is you have quite a number of housing projects that come up, and you're just not able to sell them off because they're speaking to the wrong segment. Mina, I'm hoping you're still on the call. Perhaps you could give us a perspective from the works that Habitat of Humana is doing in making affordable housing projects. From your side, what are the key challenges that you have noted as Habitat for Humana in your quest as Habitat for Humana to provide affordable housing solutions? We have seen quite a number of projects here in Zambia, and I'm sure across Africa, but perhaps you can share your perspective in line with the challenges that have been spoken to in the yearbook. From your side, what are the key challenges that are coming out of places where you're operating?
So, Mildred, just to echo, first of all, what Paul has said, so data, I think it's critical. And if I talk about market systems, data cuts across. So basically, if you look at the demand side, how are we really understanding this market we are trying to target? You have mentioned about the examples of Zambia. So if you don't understand really your market segment you're targeting, and hence these solutions that are coming out are really not addressing the needs. If you look at the supply side, we're struggling to see how we connect all these supporting functions. I'll give you an example. For example, in Kenya, we try to build capacity of the skill sets of some of these builders that are very informal. But then you find connecting them to formal financial services, because they're not structured, there's no data about them, it becomes really a challenge. So there are a lot of challenges depending on actually where you want to really target. So as I mentioned, demand side, low informal and regular income. These people mostly, because of informality, it's hard for the supply side to really understand them. High cost of accessing credit, and all of this is because data is not there. Thanks to, we are trying to utilize new technologies, for example, the credit scoring facilities, to ensure that at least where this segment is actually getting markets. But another area as well, it's the linkages part on the value chain. Paul mentioned it briefly, but you find how do you link this supply chain together? How do you create platforms whereby these people can connect? The policymakers can really understand the challenge that these people are going through, to help them in terms of tax relief, so that at least the cost of building materials can go down. And hence then all of these challenges are quite immense, but I think it's across, particularly in other African markets where, as I mentioned, informality is huge in terms of each place. Then you find the financial service providers are failing to really provide the financing that is required to, first of all, to this demand side to really afford housing, but also even the other supporting functions, the example, the builders, simply because the data, the information, what they do is not really available. So I echo with the yearbook coming up to say that data is important. I believe data is a key enabler that will open up other opportunities. It will open up in terms of understanding the demand side and their challenges. It will open up in terms of the financial service providers opening up financing to majority of the suppliers, but also the demand side. But also it will open up in terms of the builders to understand where the demand is and what is the demand. But lastly, as well, in terms of the policymakers to really understand the challenges that the market is going through, how they can actually create that enabling environment for the builders to enable to build low-cost housing, and really get into understanding the incremental housing challenges that the demand side is facing, and hence delivering that.
Thank you so much. We're now going to open up for question and answers. So if you do have a question, perhaps, or you have a comment you would like to contribute to this discussion, please feel free to raise your hand, and Tandiwe should be able to give you the platform to unmute your microphone. And perhaps while we wait for questions to come in, and your comments are very, very welcome to the CAF yearbook. Perhaps we are privileged to have Ben Atkinson. Ben Atkinson is from RAIL, and as you might have heard, they are part of the partners that were able to develop the cheapest house for 2021 coming out of Abuja. Paul, can you hear us? Are you still on the call? Ben, sorry, are you still on the call?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, great. So Ben, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Perhaps from your perspective, it would be good to get a practical sense of how we can actually deliver a house, and perhaps what challenges and perhaps what innovative solutions that you implemented on the Abuja housing project to be able to deliver the $8,200 house.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have colleagues who would be far better placed to answer that question, who come from a much more, who work much more closely with MFF, our partner in Nigeria, and would be able to give a more detailed answer about kind of how those costs were brought together. But we have had a long relationship with Millard Fuller Foundation. We work with them very closely. They have very strong expertise in doing what they are doing on this location. And I think that, combined with kind of the finance that we are able to offer them, has meant that they are able to cut costs as much as possible while still delivering a quality product. I'm not sure there's much more I can say on this point, but I'm sure that other colleagues in Real or people at MFF themselves will be able to answer any questions if anyone wants to follow up with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we only have 3 minutes left, perhaps just to wrap it up. I see we don't have any questions or comments in the chat group. Perhaps Tandiwa, you can comment. I'm not able to see any from my side.
There's nothing from my side as well, Mildred. So maybe we can wrap up. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much for joining the webinar. If you are not already members of the AHUF, please do look up how you can become a member on our website, www.ahuf.co.za. Thank you so much, Alison and your team, CAF, for again, another groundbreaking yearbook, very informative, I must say, and arguably the only source of information around housing and the supply side and demand side coming out of Africa. So thank you to you, Alison. I don't know if you've got any closing remarks.
No, just to acknowledge that there are a number of yearbook authors on this call. So I just think it points to the collaboration of the effort, and I thank them for being here and for their part in producing the yearbook.
Thank you. Any closing remarks from you, Paul? Any last words?
No, Mildred, thank you for the invitation, and congratulations to CAF on an excellent yearbook, and to all the authors. It is a massive collaboration effort, so I echo that. Thank you.
Thank you. And anything from you, Daniel?
Just to thank the team to give us the chance to really participate, but also encourage the team that it's a nice work they're doing, and also ask to have at least a more detailed or discussions perhaps per country level that will really help to unlock this, and it's good to see a market systems approach towards resolving affordable housing coming up clearly. Let's keep that effort, and we are, as Habitat, we're there to really work together to ensure that we transform the African market. Thanks a lot, Mildred.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the panel members, and thank you so much for the participants coming through this afternoon. I do encourage you to download the full CAF yearbook and have a look at what's happening in the housing market in your country. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to our secretariat. And I believe that the email has been posted in the chat group. Otherwise, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mildred. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.